and thank you all for joining us today. As you all know, after Tyre Sampson's tragic death in March, I made a promise that my department would do a complete and thorough investigation into what happened that day, and made a promise we would do everything in our power to prevent another tragic accident from happening again. My goal has been to be as transparent as possible, which is why I held a community listening session with Senator Bracey last month, and why I've regularly provided updates to the press about my department's investigation. I've made it known that we're working on crafting potential legislation to prevent these kinds of tragedies from occurring in the future. And today, I want to share with you the framework of that legislation. I want to emphasize that this is just a draft. The proposals in this framework are a direct response to our investigation into the drop tower accident. Our investigation is still ongoing, and we want to be sure any legislation we propose reflects the full results of investigation once it has been completed. When accidents occur, often it's because many contributing factors happen at the same time to create this perfect storm. Our goal here was to identify the issues that caused that perfect storm in Tyre's case and work to prevent them from ever occurring again. My team has detailed copy of this framework available to share after this press conference, so I'll cover just the highlights here. Our first proposal is to increase signage posting requirements to be more comprehensive. The second is to add authority to our department to create improved standards for operator training. We would also like to increase reporting requirements for maintenance and safety system adjustments, and require that safety sensors not be adjustable beyond the maximum tolerance from the manufacturer settings. Our department is also proposing that ride operators be required to provide the data from the manufacturer to our department. Another proposal including in this framework is the addition of new monitoring positions to perform unannounced visits, verify proper training, and observe the ride in operation to detect any potential unsafe conditions. We would also like to increase the required accident reporting from amusement rides. Currently, owners are required to notify our department if a patron receives injuries that require them to be taken to a hospital. We would like to change this requirement to include any patron that requires emergency services, regardless of where they go for emergency treatment. The final proposal, including in this package right now, is to increase our department's authority to require permanent rides to obtain a third-party safety review and certification. As you can see, we are taking this accident very seriously and working on a comprehensive response to increase rider safety across the state. I'm fortunate to be joined today by two of our legislators in the Orlando area who have been great partners in the wake of this terrible accident. Both have had important perspectives to share about the impact this has had on their community and how we can work with the legislature to make rides safer. Senator Bracey, I go ahead and turn it over to you if you'd like to give a few remarks.
Thank you, Commissioner Fried. I think it's important that we address this matter legislatively as soon as possible. I asked for a special session. The governor has not complied, but as soon as we're back in Tallahassee, I think we need to propose something immediately. And I'm going to highlight just three of the provisions that you talked about. One, I think we need new positions for unannounced visits, checking to make sure employees are properly trained. I think this is very important to hold the ride operators accountable. Secondly, I think the rides must have third-party review and certification by a national testing lab. And then third, I think we need to adopt the rules for employee training, retraining, and training program documentation. It is my belief that Tyre wouldn't have died if these three provisions were in place and in statute. It's a horrible tragedy. I also think that we should name this bill in honor of Tyre Sampson, to honor his memory, but also so that we have a reminder that this should never happen again. So again, thank you, Commissioner Fried.
And thank you, Senator Bracey, for your continued partnership in this matter. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Senator Thompson to say a few words.
Thank you very much. I've had an opportunity to meet on a number of occasions with Yarnell Sampson, who is the father of Tyre Sampson. And one of the things that we're very concerned about is that the signage that was available did not have a weight requirement. And so in addition to a height requirement, we need to make sure that the signage also deals with weight, because even though Tyre was 14 years old, he was over 6 feet tall and over 300 pounds. And so we want to make sure that the signage includes everything so that the potential rider is informed. In addition, we need greater transparency with regard to the rides that are operated here in Central Florida. We get reports that there were individuals who were not feeling well. That's very vague. We need to know specifically what the problems were so that training can be customized and designed to address what the issues are. If a person is required to go to a hospital now, there is a requirement that be reported, but not all of the people who are, quote, not feeling well go to the hospital. So we need greater transparency with regard to reporting when there are injuries. And we also must have a duty on the part of the operators to contact the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services anytime there is an adjustment to a ride that does not comply with the manufacturer's guidelines, which is what happened in the case of Tyre Sampson. And there was no reporting after the inspection, no reporting after the permit was issued. And so there has to be a duty to report to the state of Florida if there are adjustments after inspection and after permits are issued. So those are some of the things that I'll be working on in terms of the legislation that will be proposed as soon as we're back in Tallahassee.
Thank you so much, Senator, and for both of you for being such great partners for our department as we work together to get answers for the community and Tyre's family. One thing I'd like to clarify before we open it up to the press and ask for questions is that while my department can draft and propose legislation, it can't move forward unless it is sponsored by a member of the legislature. As you all know, my team as Agriculture Commissioner my term ends at the end of before next legislative session starts. So it'll be up to the next commissioner to shepherd this legislation through the process if they so choose to do so. I'm hopeful that the legislature and the next commissioner of agriculture can come together to pass this legislation on a bipartisan basis. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is a safety issue. And as leaders, we have a responsibility to do everything in our power to ensure that these rides are safe for the people of Florida. With that, I'll go ahead and take some questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Fried. Journalists, at this time, if you want to type your questions into the chat box, I will go ahead and read them. We have a question from Maris Badcock. Hello, previously Commissioner Fried said no steps would be taken related to legislation until the investigation is complete. This was in part because Commissioner Fried said she didn't want to make any assumptions. Is the investigation nearing completion? We've reached out numerous times requesting an update, but haven't heard anything since April 18th, 3 months ago.
Well, thanks, Maris, for that question. And like I said, this is a draft. The investigation is still ongoing, which is why it's not in its final form. We are going to continuously, as we go through this investigation process, as we see things come up through the investigation, it will be added into the legislation. This is a preliminary framework of where this legislation is going based on what we have already seen. And that's why you haven't seen any tremendous updates on the legislation, because it's still an investigation. But now, with having been so many months, now we're able to start putting some of that drafting in motion.
Okay, we have another question from Miguel. Based on your investigation so far, what would you say was or were the biggest errors found?
You know, obviously, we've given you all the information we have until we have any final conclusions. That would be speculation at this point. So we are able to do that and speculate what was the biggest errors that we found. We've given you all the information that we have. The investigation report is still in the process of being done. But again, based on what we are already currently finding is what this draft legislation is based on.
Thank you. Next question from Destiny Bird. Would these regulations be applied to theme parks like Universal Studios and Disney World?
No. As you all know, there is tremendous exemptions from the big theme parks. So this would be outside of those exemptions from those parks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this one is from Chantel Navarro. Hi, Commissioner, why did you want to act now instead of later on the framework?
Because as I've said since day one, we want to be transparent. We want to show that we are working on things. And so we wanted to, at least for the family's sake and for ride safety, for people to see that we are actively working on things. So that's why it's not a final form by any means yet, but that's why we wanted to be a draft. And as we were drafting through things, we wanted to make sure that you got the information to kind of start seeing where we were going and what areas that we were targeting on.
And I'd like to add to that. We want to show the public that nothing is being swept under the rug, and we want the family members to understand that we are working on this. They were very concerned when the memorial was taken down, all of the balloons, the teddy bears, everything that people had bought, so that there was no evidence that there was ever a fatality at that location. They were very hurt by that. And so we want the family members to know that we're working on this and that we're not ignoring it.
I also think it's important that we put out a draft now so that it can be vetted and talked about amongst the legislative community so that we can get a good product for the next legislative session.
Okay, that leads us into the next question from Katie Rice. She says, good morning. With Commissioner Fried leaving her office, Senator Bracy and Rep. Thompson running for national office, who's going to propose this legislation the next legislative session?
I am not running for national office. I am running for the Florida Senate and will propose the Tyre Sampson law as a member of the Florida Senate.
I'll still be involved in helping to craft this legislation, even though I won't be in the Senate. So I'll be involved.
And obviously, I'm hoping to stay involved as well in another position. But this is, look, you've got 3 dedicated public servants that are on this phone. That just because we're not potentially in the current positions doesn't mean that our passion for this issue goes away. And we all will work hard to make sure not only that it gets proposed by Senator Thompson in the Senate and whoever replaces her in the House. And of course, we will stay involved as well from my capacity and whatever that may be.
Thank you.
And I want to point out that Florida has oversight and authority with regard to amusement rides, and not every state has that. And so I'm looking forward to working with Congressman Bracy to bring some kind of uniformity throughout the country with regard to the operation of amusement rides.
Thank you. Our next question is from Molly Durig with Spectrum News 13. Can you elaborate a bit on the second point of this draft legislation? How exactly would you hope to increase your department's capacity to inspect rides more regularly?
By getting more positions filled, that we have only the capacity of the current positions and what the responsibilities are. So we would be asking the legislature to give us additional authority to hire more individuals to do these types of inspections. So it's more hands on deck.
And also, I would just say, as a member of the Appropriations Committee, I think that would require more funding that I think definitely needs to happen. And I will encourage more funding for those positions.
Thank you. Our next question is from Valerie. When would it go into effect? Have you talked to the family about this? If so, what did they say?
Well, I proposed us having a special session to address it now. But that is up to the legislative leaders, Senate President, House Speaker, and the governor to determine when we would come back. So if we don't have a special session, that would be probably in March of next year for the legislative session that we normally have.
And that session would conclude in May, and laws would become effective July 1. So that's when we anticipate that this would take effect. As has already been pointed out, this is not a partisan issue. And so I am looking forward to working across the aisle with Republicans and Democrats to make sure that this bill goes through, because we know that tourism is an economic engine here in Florida and certainly in Central Florida. And we all have a stake in it. And we want people to know that when they come to Florida, that there is some scrutiny, there's some oversight with regard to their health and their welfare and their safety.